Hey, how's it going everyone? It's Evil Monk here, and today I want to have a discussion about the Onslaught Reward system, which has been pretty underwhelming, especially for an endgame mode, which is a shame since Onslaught itself is a lot of fun to play, especially since it has a nice increased difficulty and a little bit longer playtime. Personally, I've been enjoying it a lot since it's come out, but for it to be a really good addition to our in-game cycle that the devs are working on, it needs to also have a good reward system to back it up. So that's why today I wanted to discuss what went wrong with the reward system and some potential solutions to make the reward system for Onslaught a truly rewarding part of endgame cycle. So why do Onslaught rewards feel so unrewarding? Well, normally in games we break them up between early game, mid game, and end game, with some games breaking them up even more than that, but always at the base there's those three levels. And this includes First Descendant, where First Descendant's mid-game is something like Axion Dungeons and Breach Tracking, and endgame is of course Onslaught. And the idea is, as you jump up from something like mid-game to endgame, the difficulty increases, but so do the rewards. And that's where the issue of Onslaught rewards lies. The rewards of Onslaught aren't really being increased that much than the ones you get in mid-game. In fact, if you spend about the same time doing Onslaught as you would doing a mixture of Axion Dungeons and Breach Tracking, the rewards would be about equal, and sometimes the mid-game rewards would actually be more rewarding depending on your RNG. And this is occurring because of Onslaught's failed reward system. Now normally when games go from something like mid-game to endgame, there are many common methods that games use to be able to reward their players. And what First Descendant did was it took two of these common methods and combined them into one to try and create a really rewarding endgame, which some games do this and succeed. But in the case of First Descendant and other games I've tended to like it where they fail at doing this, instead of ending up with even a somewhat rewarding game mode, you end up with two half rewards that just feel miserable. But there is an upside to this, because even though these two reward methods failed at being combined together, it did create the base for those two reward systems, meaning we have something we can build upon. In fact, we do come up with some solutions that kind of build upon these ideas later in the video, but before we get into that, to be able to fully understand those solutions, we need to dive into what these two reward methods they tried combining are, break them down, and try and understand why they failed so that we can build upon them and make a truly rewarding endgame mode. So what was the first of these two methods as they tried combining to create Onslaught's reward system? Well, the method they tried using was to save players time. And this is a pretty common thing throughout games. You create an endgame mode that allows the players to save time so that they can either A, feel like their time's more valued, since the grind will then take significantly less time, or B, it saves them time so they can go enjoy other aspects of your game. And one of the common methods to do this is you take rewards from multiple mid-game modes and then combine them into the rewards for one singular endgame mode. And usually these rewards from the mid-game modes are connected through either some kind of system or some kind of cycle. And First Descendant does this by trying to combine the rewards from Breach Tracking, taking the superconductive cooling units, and the Ancestor modules from Axion Dungeons, and then putting them all into Onslaught, with the idea that these are all around the cycle of Ancestor mods. Well, the idea is that you need to save players time by either A, you say the new endgame mode takes half the amount of time it would to do all the mid-game modes put together, or you say something like, the endgame mode takes the same amount of time as the mid-game modes, but the endgame mode gives like double rewards. And neither of these are being done with Onslaught's reward system here. In fact, if you were to spend, let's just say, 3 runs of Breach Tracking and 1 run of Axion Dungeons, you would potentially get, at the bare minimum, 120 super cooling units, and potentially 1 Ancestor module. And also, for the super cooling units from Breach Tracking, you had the chance to roll higher values. So even though each of those runs will give you 40, is potentially each one of those will give you 80 or 100 or even 500. And all you get from Onslaught is 130 cooling units and potentially one Ancestor module. So even in the best case scenario for Onslaught here versus mid-game modes, it would be 130 versus 120 super cooling units and one Ancestor module versus one Ancestor module. You're not actually saving the players any time here because their rewards aren't really all that different. They're basically the same, and in all honesty, usually the mid-game rewards give you more, meaning you saved more time actually doing mid-game, and the rewards from Onslaught are now useless, since you're not saving the players any time, you're not giving them the opportunity to go play other modes, and you're not really valuing their time. So we can say this first method ended up failing because they only went halfway through it. And the second method they were trying to use in this Onslaught reward system is pretty common throughout most games, and that is a way for the players to be able to increase their power level. Now, most games they do this through giving them players a new item which directly adds on to their power level, or you take an item that they already could get, but had a large amount of RNG in that item, and you reduce the RNG so that they can more consistently get to the higher power levels that were hard to get to before. And this might sound familiar because yes, First Descendant was trying to do this with Ancestor modules, which isn't a bad idea in itself, but you could only get 4 a week, and while these 4 a week did have 2 gold stats rolled on them, which does technically give you a more consistent way to get stronger, by limiting it to 4 a week, and with the RNG that you have on these Ancestor modules, it's just not a consistent way to increase your power. In fact, let's really quickly just do some math here so you can figure out the probability that you're able to get an Ancestor module for a character that you want. So we'll make a couple assumptions here. We'll say there's only one Descendant module that you want here. And we'll say, just for the sake of this, there's 20 Descendants. I know there's more currently in the game, and the game's continuously getting more Descendants every few months. But just for the sake of this, we're just going to say 20. And then on average, the amount of stats that you can roll for an Ancestor module are 15. But generally, if you want a really good Ancestor module, you're probably only looking for 3 out of those 15 stats. And we'll also say for this that you only rolled 2 stats and no negatives. So we take 1 over 20, since you're only looking out of 1 out of the 20 Descendants in this circumstance. Then we say 3 out of 15 stats, since you're only looking for 3 of the 15 stats. And then for your second stat, because you removed 1 stat from the pool, it goes down to 2 out of 14. And we'll multiply all those, and then times that by 100 to get your percentage, and would you look at that? You have, with this math, and this, by the way, is less Descendants than there are currently in the game, so your RNG is actually worse in the game, you have 0.14% chance to roll an Ancestor module you want. Now, if we just tried to say how many times that takes to get to 100%, it would be 712 times, just through probability, to guarantee get that. That is really low RNG, and there are honestly games that have worse RNG for items to get stronger, but the difference is that you can overwhelm the bad RNG with quantity. And like I said, you only get 4 of these a week. That means 16 a month, or 192 a year. And don't forget, 712 by probability to get the guarantee. It would take several years. Meaning, even though it sounds like we're getting a way to consistently get stronger, we actually aren't, because we can't overwhelm that bad RNG with quantity, with just being able to mass do like Onslaught to get guaranteed gold Ancestor modules. So this actually fails at making the player consistently stronger. In fact, it's just hiding bad RNG, basically. Meaning, this method also fails and becomes a half method. But even though these 2 reward methods did end up failing, even combined, to make Onslaught feel, well, rewarding, they do at least give us a base that we can build off of to make Onslaught a truly rewarding endgame mode. Though, before we hop into some solutions to actually make Onslaught this rewarding game mode, I just do want to make a quick note about these solutions. Only one of these solutions should be implemented, because you don't want to overwhelm one game mode to be so overwhelmingly rewarding that no one wants to play any other game modes. To use an analogy that a lot of people use when talking about endgame, or they talk about you want to make an endgame amusement park where there's a whole bunch of different game modes or rides that people want to go on in the amusement park instead of making, content islands be your endgame. In a similar vein, you also don't want to make your amusement park a one-ride attraction, where everyone only wants to go on the one ride and doesn't want to do anything else. Because eventually, they'll get bored and want to leave and never come back. Similarly, in First Descendant, if you make Onslaught the only game mode that has any worthwhile rewards of doing, or so many rewards that no other game mode has any point of being done, then everyone will just do Onslaught, and eventually they'll get tired and bored of doing Onslaught and just leave. This is why you need to be careful when improving or reworking Onslaught's reward system, because you do want to make sure that's not so overwhelming that no one does any other game modes, but because it is an endgame mode, it does need to be more rewarding than something like a mid-game or early game mode. Which is why we can once again get to the recommendation. Only one of these solutions that we're about to get into now should be done, because if you combine them all, it will just overwhelm Onslaught's reward system and will make it the only game mode worth doing. And the first of these solutions, which I personally think is the best out of these three that we're going to go over, has to do with ultimate alignment devices. So if people don't know what an ultimate alignment device is, or any of the alignment devices are in general, they're the little rings that you use to guarantee certain rarity rolls when you're re-rolling your Ancestor module. And you can only use one at a time. Now, the reason why the solution has to deal with ultimate alignment devices is one of the failed reward systems that we talked about earlier was trying to make players consistently stronger through reducing RNG in Ancestor module rerolls. And the solution in this method is have ultimate alignment devices be a reward in Onslaught level 3. Where Onslaught level 3 would give you something like 3 ultimate alignment devices. We'd have Onslaught 2 give you 1 ultimate alignment device and 2 rare alignment devices. And Onslaught level 1 give you something like 3 rare alignment devices. The numbers could be changed to be more or less, but these are what I think the starting value should be. And on top of that, you also increase the amount of alignment devices you can use per Ancestor module reroll from 1 to 2. Doing these two things together gives us a way to reduce the RNG of Ancestor modules greatly and give a way to get those guaranteed double gold rolls, since we want something on the level of those weeklies. And this will help increase player strength consistently, since the bad RNG of Ancestor modules, we can overwhelm it now with quantity using the solution. Now, the reason why I do think the solution is really good is this doesn't necessarily break the current loop for Ancestor modules. So the current loop for Ancestor modules is you get an Ancestor module from Axion Dungeon. If you don't like it, you go get super cooling material from Breach Tracking, and then you go to the Ancestor module terminal and re-roll it. And if it's good, you keep it. If not, then you keep doing the re-roll cycle until you get one that you like, or it becomes too costly to re-roll, and then you go back to Axion Dungeon and get a new one. If we were to add this, where we had the ultimate alignment devices, you'd just be adding a step in that loop, which might make each cycle of the loop longer, but since you're greatly reducing the RNG, makes it so the number of times you have to go through that loop is a lot less. And this makes it so you also have a more healthy endgame cycle, where people aren't just running only through Onslaught, they're encouraged to go through all the game modes. Once again, you want to make a healthy endgame where people are playing multiple game modes instead of just on cycle of one game mode, since people will eventually get tired of a game mode if they're doing it on repeat of that only game mode without any kind of break in the cycle. The other benefit of this is because you are still doing the Ancestor module loop, it doesn't really necessarily break the player market either, since a lot of people like to do trading with the player market. Because this will still involve a lot of grinding, you'll still have people be able to make caliber off the player market, trading to players who don't want to do necessarily the grind. But this will also help a lot of people who want to do the grind to get those better ancestor modules. This is why I think it's the best solution, is because it doesn't necessarily break any systems currently in the game, and in fact improves most of them overall, and makes ancestor modules a heck of a lot less frustrating. And now let's move on to our second solution. Now this one's going to build upon the idea of saving players time, with effectively having Onslaught replace breach tracking in that ancestor mod reroll loop that we talked about in the previous solution. And to do this, you would need to massively increase the amount of superconductive cooling units you get from Onslaught. Now this isn't an uncommon method, this is actually, in all honesty, pretty common in games where you have an endgame mode come out and it effectively replaces a previous tier's mode as a grinding method. And breach tracking would still have a reason in the game for people in mid-game to be able to get the superconductive cooling units a little bit easier, with Onslaught just rewarding more veteran players who have more finalized builds. And to start this off, I would recommend increasing superconductive cooling units to something along the lines of 300 to 400 per run, with the idea that you'd have to also increase it further in the future if somehow someone found a build to grind out breach tracking even more efficiently, since eventually someone may come out with a build to do something like half breach tracking's current time. So you would, as time goes on, have to increase Onslaught's rewards to be able to kind of represent this change and still keep Onslaught as the most efficient farming method. Now the reason why I do like this solution is it doesn't break the loop at all for the ancestor module loop that's currently going on. It just replaces it, one section of it, with Onslaught to make it more efficient and save players time. And it's something that's pretty commonly done in a lot of games. This isn't actually removing anything, it's just enhancing what's already there. So I think that's why this is currently another good solution that they can do with Onslaught. And similar to our first solution, our third one will work along similar lines of giving the players a way to more consistently increase their strength. But for this one, instead of working with the Ancestor Module reroll cycle, it would be to have the random dropped Ancestor Modules you get as a reward from Onslaught have 2 guaranteed gold rolls on them, similar to the weeklies you guys already get. But there is an issue with this solution, and in all honesty, I think out of the 3, this one is the worst one. But because it is a solution, I wanted to bring it up and discuss it. Mainly to also compare with the other 2 solutions. Now the biggest issue with this one is that instead of enhancing the current endgame loop for ancestor modules or improving it in a healthy way, like the first 2 solutions do, this one just overwrites the entire loop and effectively replaces it. Since you wouldn't need to reroll ancestor modules anymore, you would just continuously do Onslaught to get the guaranteed gold rolls. And while this would save players time, you would effectively get them in that loop where they're only doing one game mode, which they would probably eventually get bored of. Similar to what we were talking about in the intro of the solutions, where you don't want to overwhelm one game mode to be the only game mode worth playing. That's why I don't think this solution is as good as the other 2, but once again, because it is a solution, I figured it was worth talking about and discussing why it's not as good as the other 2. And mainly that reason is, once again, it just doesn't make for a healthy endgame to have one game mode being played on loop. And one final thing I want to talk about beyond the solutions that we just discussed for Onslaught are Biochips, which, if anyone doesn't know what those are, they are the random drop from Onslaught level 3, and you also get 4 from weeklies, that you use to get the true rewards from bounties, which is honestly kind of just awful. And this is because you're basically locking an entire game mode behind a random drop item from one of the in-game modes, or locked behind weeklies, and either way that doesn't really improve it. This doesn't really put the game mode itself in the gameplay loop or cycle, And just makes me question why bounties were even added in the first place instead of just having the keys be opened up in Albion through some NPC, since at least that wouldn't have a game mode basically entirely locked behind a biochip, which you can play bounties without the biochip, but there's really no point. So I think an honest solution here would be to make biochips a guaranteed drop from Onslaught, where Onslaught 3 would probably drop 2, Onslaught 2 would probably drop 1, and Onslaught 1 would either not drop any, or maybe have like a 50% chance to drop 1, since bounties are supposed to be the level of Onslaught 2, so you wouldn't necessarily need to have Onslaught level 1, which is the easier game mode, have to drop one of those keys. But at least Onslaught 2 should, and Onslaught 3 should. This also enhances the rewards for Onslaught and makes it more rewarding to do, and also adds bounties into the gameplay loop, where after you do a string of Onslaughts, you'd probably want to go do bounties to get some more rewards. So I think adding biochips as a guaranteed reward should be done along with one of the solutions that we just got through talking about, since this would not only make Onslaught more rewarding, but also add bounties as part of the endgame loop/cycle, giving players more things to do, which is something you obviously want in your endgame, is to have a healthy selection of different game modes for players to do, and this would allow bounties to be a part of that. And let's go ahead and wrap up for this discussion video. Now, I really do hope Onslaught reward system gets improved, because Onslaught is a lot of fun, but its rewards just don't reflect it being an in-game mode. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Do you agree with what we discussed in this video? Do you have a different viewpoint, or maybe even a different solution? Let me know down below. Also, because this is the first discussion video I post on this channel, I appreciate you guys letting me know. Do you enjoy this kind of content? Do you want to see more? Or maybe even anything you want to add to these types of videos? Let me know down in the comments down below as well. Also, if you guys did enjoy the video, I'd appreciate it if you could hit that like button. It helps out the video a lot. And if you want to know when new videos are coming out, don't forget that subscribe button and that notification bell. Also, I do stream most days on Twitch. I'll go ahead and throw up the information on the screen there. And once again, if you guys could hit that like button, I would appreciate it. It does help out the video get out to a lot more people. But that's going to go ahead and wrap it up for this video. I appreciate y'all watching, and I'll catch y'all again later.